Hello, I'm Eric Walenza, founder of IoT One, and this is the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Every episode, I interview one expert about a project that is impacting businesses today. Visit us at iot1.com to learn more, or email me to start a discussion. Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight. I'm joined today by Steve Dertien. Steve is CTO for CAD and PLM business at PTC. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into three use cases. We'll be looking first at product development, then we'll be looking at operations and manufacturing, and third, IT implementation. Steve, product and development, as a starting place, talk to us about who the customer was, or let's say who a typical customer might be, and the decision process to invest in a solution. How are solution providers selected? What's the decision process look like around product development use case in the IoT domain?
I can refer to a couple different use cases. We certainly have publicly made known a use case from Flowserve where we're actively monitoring pumps that are used in oil and refinery processing and so forth. And it's interesting. Everybody seems to have a pump demo that I meet that's in this space. But, when you think about it, there's tens of thousands of pumps that are out there that, are literally moving our drinking water around and so forth. And, what they wanted to understand is how those pumps are operating, the value that, those pumps have in the material that they're handling, and ultimately getting out ahead of either the product design side, so understanding what the implications are on the design, so they can improve and make pumps that last longer in various conditions and environments and so forth. And what we've done in that case is ultimately taken active data from the pump as it's deployed in its unique environment, if you will, and almost every pump is unique in its environment, and stream that data back such that when they want to analyze failure, they want to analyze usage, that they're able to take that IoT data and route it through platforms like ANSYS to do, fluid dynamic analysis or system modeling analysis as far as, how that entire handling system would be. That decision process was, kind of initiated by Flowserve, and PTC certainly was involved early on to, help them understand how to essentially evolve their product from effectively a commodity to a high scale value offering that they can take to customers.
Yeah. So is this the engineering department, or who's engaging you at a starting point for this?
Primarily in engineering to begin, and then from an executive alignment point of view, the idea could they ultimately drive a more significant product offering into the market, that includes this active monitoring and capability and so forth, that is really guarding and protecting the value that they're delivering, right? So if you think about a oil refinery, a pump could be considered a commodity item. Over time, in our last podcast, you had alluded to electrical monitoring. When you figure out that electrical consumption in a refinery might occupy 90% of their costs over the long haul, their variable cost in terms of energy use, could they optimize their offering to reduce their energy consumption yet have a good yield? And so they're looking at how do they create greater value for their customers. And so that really is a case where it originated out of the product engineering team, is my understanding.
What was the technology suite that was used in this? And certainly speak to the PTC technologies. If there were other technologies, also it'd be interesting to know who you were working with to implement the solution.
So to start, it was a collaboration, if you will, to kind of build these. If you think about the assets that are out in the world, there's a lot more that exist today that are not smart and connected than there are that are connected. And how do you go through and retrofit these large environments? And so we partnered with National Instruments to essentially get us the data, so vibration and flow rates and so forth from the installation. NI has a fantastic suite of technology that allows you to do that, and they have technology is often found in factories as well for like end of line product testing and a lot of other conditional monitoring types of use cases. We also partnered with HPE. So HPE is one of the obviously on the server side, have started creating a line of very industrial compute platforms that allow you to do heavy lifting at the edge, if you will. So it's a fantastic platform, especially if you're going to put a lot of analytics in. And this solution did employ active monitoring and analytics right at the edge. So a massive amount of data, more data than you'd ever really want to send to the cloud, particularly for remote locations like offshore rigs and that sort of stuff. It's really useful to have that compute at the edge. And so HPE was a huge partner in that as well. And then, between the three of us, married our ThingWorx technology stack with, the information streaming from NI's aggregation from all the sensors. And lastly, partnered with ANSYS a little bit here to pipe data from the pump into ANSYS to do simulation and analysis.
Gotcha. So you've got PTC, NI, HP, ANSYS, Flowserve. Was there a system integrator? Was PTC kind of playing the system integration role? How was the system tied together?
Yeah, we were playing the system integration role in the early on days, and then since that, in working with Deloitte Digital in particular, Deloitte now takes this type of approach and strategy that we kind of coined with Flowserve, and that's now part of an offering that we jointly, the four of us, excluding we have a different offering with ANSYS, but if you actually went to Deloitte, you would actually get HPE hardware with ThingWorx inside of it, with National Instruments technology that you could actually apply in a use case, complete with kind of a strategy on how that implementation would work and so forth. And so we, this was early days for us. It was about 2 years ago where we were trying to figure out how exactly do you express how you bring this technology together. There was no recipe for it at the time, and so we did a lot of the work with those partners to bring that together.
Okay, I like that. So it's technology plus strategy plus service to get it done, and that's the package.
That's right.
Challenges. Was this a seamless implementation? Did you encounter challenges along the way?
I think there were numerous challenges along the way. One is figuring out, on the analytics side of things, for example, everybody talks about big data analytics and predictive and so forth. And, one of the big aspects of that is, what frequency of data do you need to provide, value and insight? If you monitor a pump every hour, I don't know that you would get the level of insight you were looking for to kind of prevent a failure mode from occurring. If you look at it too fast, you're talking about data rates that, just kind of exceed practical. And so there were a lot of challenges in trying to figure out, the right balance, for the use case, if you will. And then, plumbing it all together. So we mentioned in the prior podcast how we made ThingWorx 8 very integral. Now, the work that we did there was before we had acquired the Kepware technology, which which now makes that, sort of acquisition even faster. But nonetheless, it's going through the challenges of bringing that all together and dealing with it at scale. So it was certainly on the early days of what I call high volume edge processing.
So we had talked in the last episode about data ownership, data accessibility, and so forth. We have a few partners here that are accessing the data at some point. How was access to the data, ownership of the data, structured in this particular case?
I can't really reveal how Flowserve is actually dealing that with their end customers, but I would say that the offering and the edge compute and so forth, as we currently have it structured, allows that data to be kind of processed in place, if you will. What I would say is for the Deloitte offering that they're now taking with this technology into customers, is the operational setting in which they're deploying the technology stack is potentially like the end owner of that data. And in most cases, in a factory setting where you're doing a brownfield retrofit or something like that, that's pretty reasonable. In this case, Flowserve is basically trying to position themselves to have a greater strategic relationship with their customers as well. And because the offering delivers a better value than what the customer would receive originally, I think that's a boundary case where that's kind of a permissive grant, if you will, for that data.
Another case that we wanted to touch on was operations and manufacturing, and you have in particular a GE case in mind. Let's start again with the foundation, the customer, the decision process. How did this project initiate?
Yeah, so I believe our sales team, working with GE, just kind of discovered a set of challenges inside the factory. So there's even though factories are really well connected, there's still a lot of extra things that can be done in there. And in this case, this one facility at GE does locomotive refurbishment, right? So they bring in the GE locomotives, they, kind of tear them down, go through the repair procedures that are needed to basically introduce more addressable product life into them, right? So it's a bit of a remanufacturing operation, as I understand it, and they really wanted to gain real time insight into the health and the labor efficiency of that, so that they could improve their downtime. So effectively, what they were struggling with, or what the use case that the team kind of came into was 10 to 20% of their downtime is really just being held up by managing the operator priorities, meaning did this sequence of operations get done in time for tomorrow's activities to begin? And if they didn't, can I reorient the work schedules so that I have as much operator efficiency as I can? Because we certainly don't want the mechanics and the technicians and the operators, if you will, who are supposed to be spinning the wrenches and doing the work, sitting around idle. That's a non-recoverable cost at that point. And so they really focused on creating the KPIs to solve that challenge.
From one perspective, you might say that GE is a competitor to an extent. They have Predix, they have quite a robust business unit in GE Digital. In this case, why do you think that they chose to work with PTC as opposed to doing this internal?
I think the availability of the technology, the use case that they were specifically trying to address relative to the use case that Predix is addressing. We do have a great partnership relationship with both aspects of GE in terms of using ThingWorx technology. And so on that end, I think there's more synergy there with GE than there is competitive, which is what you would get from the outset looking at an analyst report. But we have a flavor of ThingWorx for Predix that allows them to even unlock the value from that as well. So even their acquisition of ServiceMax, has a ThingWorx, based aspect to it. So, from that perspective, we have a lot better relationship than I think you'd see on paper. And so in this case, because we were focusing on a use case that was not directly addressed by GE in house, it was a good use of ThingWorx standalone to go after this particular problem.
Great point that you do have a good collaborative working relationship with GE. In the last case, there was quite a suite of partners working together. Was it the same situation in this, or was it primarily ThingWorx?
I don't believe it was nearly the same, because the interesting thing inside factories is there's a lot of internal knowledge on the systems that you want to connect to, right? And when I say systems, a lot of this information is now coming not from the locomotive itself, but from business systems like MES and ERP and so forth. So a lot more enterprise system access, as well as other data to get at those KPIs, right? And so they had a lot more, my understanding, internal domain knowledge on how those worked. And our team essentially went in and because they had that advanced understanding, just made it really straightforward for them to attach it into ThingWorx and make progress with it. Beyond the other specifics, I don't know specifically, whether the GE Digital team, which also has similar facilities, was immediately involved as well.
How active are you in these cases in working with the customer to identify success metrics, to track and kind of try to prove out what is the ROI, or as close an estimate to the ROI as possible? In this case, were you actively involved?
Our account teams are generally quite involved in that process. So we have a very direct sell model where our sales teams work with customers to basically surface problems and present solutions. As it pertains to IoT, we do have a format where as we start to understand the scope and scale of their challenges, we kind of present them with a workshop that allows us to, number one, provide a little bit of evidence and proof point that we can accomplish the objective that they're looking to achieve, and in the process of doing that, understand what success actually looks like, what metrics need to be in place, how do you get there, and so forth. And in our first podcast, we had talked about this objective setting of think big, so kind of lay that out, but then we're now on the start small and scale quickly part. So start small with a hyper focused problem, and then show in a matter of several days or maybe a couple of weeks immense amounts of progress. And that alone is maybe a tipping point for a lot of customers to show that you can unlock value that fast. And when we get into discussing the IT portion, one of the customers that we'll reference there, it has a fundamentally different way of doing implementation. Where they're knocking out success measured in weeks. Literally, anything longer than that, they have 100 other things that they could move on and show value with. Something that takes a year or two is not worth the energy, because they can find a lot faster success in other categories. Maybe that's a nice segue into that when we're ready.
Yeah, maybe right before we segment over there, product development, I think that's a bit more strategic in scope, a bit maybe harder to put a hard KPI. In the case of manufacturing downtime, we have a pretty clear set of KPIs, quite measurable, quite easily associated with real money. Are you currently, or are you considering having a relationship with a partner where you would say, GE, we think we can achieve this metric. If we do, then basically this is our commission, our success-based commission fee. If we don't, then potentially scaling down to free use of the platform. Have you looked at kind of success-based pricing?
We have it. And in some cases where it's a real bona fide understanding of what it is, let's say like service parts and logistics types of things, where there's a pretty profound understanding of what that success is. We do have the options there. What I would say is a lot of customers have actually been looking more towards stable, recognizable pricing as opposed to highly variable, because again, on the operation side, they're trying to kind of constrain and understand what they're doing. And given that we're still early in the number of applicable use cases that we have and the variables that actually impact it, we've found right now that as a lead pricing model is probably not the easiest of things to convince a customer with. But as you have solutions that actually have more addressable problem, we would. Part of our challenge too is PTC is not in a primary services engagement business. We do have a service organization, but think of them as like expert-led instructors that are really trying to help the SI ecosystem kind of deliver that value. And so from that prospect as well, there's some interesting challenges on how you quantify, measure, and receive a value-based pricing model. So I would say it's interesting to us. We're going through and thinking about what those are, but also kind of recognizing the market dynamics on buying that way as well.
Okay, so this last use case that we wanted to talk about, IT implementation, this is a case where you're working with a system integrator and partnering to bring the solution to customers. Is that right, or define the relationship here?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. So inside of a lot of factory use cases, there may be the equivalent of a digital team. Let's just kind of put it that way, where IT is kind of in the driver's seat in some of these. Now, there's this interesting quantification inside of factories between, what role IT plays and what role OT, or operational technology, plays. And the OT side is generally staffed by your control engineers and so forth. And this idea that the control engineer can kind of get self-started and start moving things along. But inside the factory, that digital team that's going off and setting those success patterns, if you will, we're finding a number of those cases where this team is working across multiple factories, giving great scale at solving use cases, finding patterns of repeatability and efficiency, and then driving those, convincing. Think about it this way: the plant managers are their customer. They're convincing them that they can find 1, 2, 3% operational efficiency, if they partner with IT to kind of come and do this. And what I've seen that has been really radical in how successful implementations have been working in that particular space is when they're an IT led, like internal digital team, where they take an extremely agile approach. Right, when they embrace that model, they find success a lot faster. And then their partners, right, the plant managers and so forth, their sponsors, appreciate the value that they've created, because they didn't waste a ton of their time, and they showed a lot of promise in that first onset, which gets them the second, the third, and the fourth opportunity to kind of go off and conquer. So I think inside the factory that exists, there are SIs that have the same basic strategy, if you will, where they kind of go over and do that in that setting as well. And then on the product side, so let's like step out of the factory a little bit. That's a kind of a very different operating environment, and get into, kind of the enterprise side of the business, working with IT and product management, engineering, and so forth. We definitely see the SIs and the partners of PTC that have consulting practices that kind of embrace that idea of rapid, agile processes and so forth, that they get value. And I'll kind of highlight one company in the UK. They were doing they did an estimate that said, for us to create this connected, medical device, it probably would, a high six-figure design project for us. It would take us 12 months to do. And it's beyond our domain expertise. We don't have the communications background. We don't have the infrastructure background. We generally don't have anything more than a product development background. And so what was really awesome about that experience for them is they knew they were just over their wheels. There was no way they were going to be able to do it themselves. And so they worked with a partner who came in with a radical different frame of mind, who said, we need these particular partners for your device security. We need this partner for, your cloud infrastructure. We'll be your implementation partner. And, what is shocking about this use case is the customer had a perspective of what the use case was, and it was going to take them 12 months to achieve. This team actually figured out what it was in 6 months, or I'm sorry, 6 weeks. So they figured out everything, had a working product, so they engineered, developed the connectivity, had a working product, and then tested it with customers and realized like their initial requirements were about 90 degrees off from the customer's anticipated requirement. And so they were able to actually do a course correction in everything in that short window of time. Can you imagine like what a career ender it could have been, had they gone the long way? And so that's this idea of like moving swiftly to kind of figure out what that problem is. And so I think our partners are particularly the SIs, are really, really latching on to that type of exploratory research, if you will, with customers to get to a problem quickly.
And so, I mean, certainly agile methodology, but what technologies were used that enabled this flexibility and this rapid pace of development?
Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a selfish play here to say, really, it's at the middle of it is ThingWorx and how rapid we make it, so that we would call it a late binding decision, but you can make a decision as late as possible in the design process on how you want your IoT strategy to work, without having like a cascading ripple effect in thousands of lines of code that you would have to go and deploy, right? So if your device is communicating and then you want to change your use case, or you want to add a new use case, and you want to expand, you're not in a typical let me write up the requirements, let me go find some developers, let me go spend 2 weeks on a sprint writing a lot of code that may need to get trashed in the process. If you want to change like where an attribute goes, how that property gets understood, maybe even split that up a little bit, we're talking about having a powerful suite here that does that in literally minutes. And so the partners realize that, or the ones that are really educated on using the platform, kind of use that to their advantage.
So this is a hardware device case that you're explaining here. So we have a supply chain, we have components that have to be spec'd out. I think a bit more difficult to change than in a pure software environment. Were they using some measure of digital twin, or were they basically using a kind of a simulation of the device, or using Arduino and kind of off the shelf parts to mock up the device? I mean, how were they managing the hardware components and the?
Great observation. Yeah, and I did skip that. At first, if I get the sequence right, I believe just mocked up very simple connectivity using, the equivalent of a Raspberry Pi, like in the first couple of days. Just, do I have the right things? And then once they understood, what that software footprint needed to be, the use case that they were pursuing, I believe they contract manufactured some fast prototype boards that had cellular connectivity with the right SIM card capability, because it's in Europe there's a few different SIM formats where the devices go, and the telco provider that attaches. But essentially created a really small form factor that could fit in the existing product as it was designed. So no radical redesign of the product, as I understood, to add connectivity into it. And then from there, working with the telco provider, kind of had the right chipset on that board, and then stamped them out in that 6-week period of time. So now they had fully functional prototype production, I would say production capable stuff. Once they had that set, now they could go and commit to actually doing a production run of these boards. And I believe that was the next phase in their project between that early 6-week sprint, and then the next one is just productionizing everything.
You've got a lot of experience in a variety of use cases. If you were speaking to somebody that was in early stage planning for an IoT deployment, what's the one piece of advice that you would emphasize in order to help them maximize the chance of success, minimize the pain or the risk of failure?
They're not alone. They're not pioneering something that is totally net new. There is sufficient wealth of M2M experience and so forth over the past decade or so, including what PTC brings to bear. That to basically field their questions early and often with the vendors, to kind of let them know where they're within the realm of the technologies that currently exist today. Where are they potentially thinking where those challenges might be present, obstacles and so forth, and really kind of rely on both the vendors and I would say this broadly speaking, Amazon, Azure, PTC, and so forth, to kind of get exposure early. To kind of get involved in that. And then from there, just kind of go through and look at the, kind of the breadth of what each of us are essentially offering and understand, that we bring to bear a large number of customers that may have already, crossed this path before. So, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, if you will. I think we've seen a lot of great success. And then certainly shocked by how many new use cases come to bear, but we have a tremendous talented team that they can call upon within our sales and our application engineers and so forth to help, kind of solve their problem. And then for the developers, so that's more kind of at the executive and the director level type personas. But, for developers themselves, get into, our developer side of ThingWorx. We have fantastic forums where some of our leading people are engaging with you, trying to understand your problem and help you through that. That's something that we do to kind of enable them. And ultimately, for even the relatively small projects, we have a customer success team that even has like some prescribed ways on how to structure a project, how to get things moving. So if you're starting small enough where you're not interested in hiring an SI or something like that, we still provide structured guidance to allow even the smaller projects to get off the ground and find success.
Listening today, we've got people from the end user side, people from different technology domains that might be interested in partnering with PTC in some respect. How should people that are looking at deploying IoT platforms or people that might want to partner with PTC, how should they get in touch with your team or with the correct people at PTC?
Yeah, going through thingworx.com, we have a whole bunch of different channels there as far as making direct contact with PTC. And then I'm obviously on LinkedIn at Steve Dertien on LinkedIn there, and you definitely send me a message, and certainly can route you to the right contact based on what your needs are, and can kind of go from there.
Steve, so thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. This has been fantastic. Greatly appreciate the time.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. We help to accelerate digital transformation by advising business leaders on how to integrate IoT technologies into their operations and products. We appreciate your thoughts, suggestions, and of course your reviews. And if you have an interesting project, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. You can write me at eric.walenza@iot1.com.